Joining me now in this Sunday Morning Futures exclusive is Kevin Warsh, who served as a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors from 2006 to 2011. It's great to see you, Kevin.
Great to be with you, Maria.
Thank you so much for being here. You know, President Trump has been trying to get Jay Powell to cut rates for a long time. We all know what we're talking about, $36+ trillion in debt, $9 trillion in debt that is turning over this year. Shouldn't it be part of the Fed's thinking to say, okay, we're spending more money on interest just to hold that debt than we do on defense spending? I understand the Fed has a mandate, but should you become the chairman of the Fed, is this something that you would be thinking about in terms of lowering rates being a positive for the president dealing with the nation's debt?
So the president's right to be frustrated with the Jay Powell and the Federal Reserve. Inflation comes when the government spends too much. That's the spending you're talking about, and prints too much. And the government's done just that thing over the last 4 or 5 years. The government needs to put its fiscal house in order and its monetary house in order. The president took a good shot at putting the fiscal house in order through this tax bill. We're going to grow a lot more than the Congressional Budget Office says. The U.S. is on the cusp of, I think, a radical improvement in our productive capacity. The tax bill is part of it. Deregulatory policy is part of it. Spending reductions are part of it. And the Fed needs to get on board.
I mean, look, President Trump is doing his part. I mean, a lot of hysteria over his tariffs, and yet look what just happened. The tariffs actually brought in $27 billion for the month, customs duties. You're talking about $100 billion on an annualized basis for tariffs, and we have a budget surplus for the month of June. Should the Federal Reserve be cutting interest rates right now?
So in a word, yes. Maria, it's quite simple. Why is it that money and financial conditions are so loose on Wall Street and considerably tighter on Main Street? Because the Fed has the policy mix exactly wrong. It has a big balance sheet like we're in the 2008 crisis, the 2020 pandemic, and has rates that are too high. It needs to shrink the Fed balance sheet and cut interest rates. In so doing, Main Street can get a much lower cost of credit. First-time home buyers can find their way into houses, and the policy mix would be right. I don't know if I'm just saying that because I grew up 200 miles from here in a sort of place far from the bright lights in big city. But Main Street needs to get its break, and it's high time they do it, and the Fed can be part of that.
Now, the president has talked about the fact that Jay Powell also used money for new headquarters of the Federal Reserve. Bill Pulte, the head of the FHFA, wants Jay Powell to resign over it. What do you make of that money being used for new headquarters?
So it's outrageous. I had that job when I was at the Fed more than a decade ago. A colleague of mine and I were responsible for the Fed budget and the budgets of the reserve banks. And of course, the bureaucracy comes and says they want new shiny buildings. I can't imagine that that's a good use of taxpayer money. You know, maybe a new paint job, maybe some fresh computer terminals, maybe some brand new models at the Fed so we can improve the conduct of monetary policy, have a better understanding of the economy. So I wasn't surprised, but it's the wrong use of taxpayer money. $4 billion could be otherwise better spent. But I think it's actually more important than that. The Fed has lost its way. It's lost its way in supervision. It's lost its way in monetary policy. And all this big money on big fancy buildings is just another indication. Why does that matter, Maria? It matters because what matters most to the Fed is credibility. The Fed has to look like a serious, sober institution. And if you look back to where we were last September, the Fed cut rates 50 basis points before the election.
Right before the election.
Another 50 basis points after. Hadn't done that kind of thing around an election in 50 years. But what happened? Markets are smart. The Fed cut rates. Long-term interest rates went up almost a percentage point. That's because they're losing credibility. Whatever happens next, whatever decisions the president makes, the next head of the Fed and the Federal Reserve needs to rebuild that credibility. So when you cut rates, you know what happens? Rates fall across the yield curve so that small businesses and homeowners can start to afford things that are right now only affordable on Wall Street.
The president has been considering you as the successor to Jay Powell. He said some very nice things about you to me recently when I was talking with him. Powell's term is up in May, but there's also an opening in the Federal Reserve in January. Would you be poised to accept the position on the board in January?
I had that job. I was a governor for 6 years during the financial crisis. It's a great job to have. It's up to the president to make whatever decisions he wants. But I think what we need is regime change at the Fed. And that's not just about the chairman. It's about a whole range of people. It's about changing their mindset and their models. And frankly, it's about breaking some heads, because the way they've been doing business is not working. Maybe in New York, maybe in Washington, people think that it's great to have a Fed chair as a martyr. But that's not what the American people need. They need a reformer to fix this so that the Federal Reserve can get on the right side. I'll just leave you with this, Maria. This period reminds me of the 1990s. What's happening now is the most transformative time in American economic history in a very long time. Productivity should be booming in the next 5 to 10 years because of technology. The U.S. should be at the very forefront of that. The president calls it the golden age, and he could well be right about this. Alan Greenspan kept rates low because he knew these policies were structurally disinflationary. The Fed doesn't have that view, and they're working against that agenda. If you recognize what an important moment this is, the Fed needs to be part of it, and the Fed needs to understand where we are in our economic future.
I guess what I was getting at is, would it be a scenario where the president would put you in to the governor's role in January and then ultimately make you chairman come May? But in terms of the broad macro story right now, what would be the impact of a cut in interest rates? What kind of growth are you expecting now, and would that accelerate with a cut in rates?
So I think it would. I think the economy is in reasonable shape right now. I think the economy is actually improving. Most of my peers think the economy is in terrible shape, that the president's tariffs are going to do harm. And so what do we hear from the Federal Reserve? We hear that inflation was first the fault of Vladimir Putin. Then we heard it was the fault of the pandemic. And now Chairman Powell and others say inflation's the fault of the president. No, Congress gave this responsibility to the Federal Reserve. They're responsible for inflation. It is their choice. They made the great mistake, which caused this great surge in inflation. We can ill afford them to make another great mistake. I feel like they're fighting a bit the last war, keeping rates higher than they otherwise need to be. Well, the next war is going to look a lot different, and the U.S. can win it.
Yeah, you never hear a word about Joe Biden's inflation, which was 40-year highs from the Federal Reserve. Kevin, it's great to have you this morning. Thank you so much.
Great to be with you.
All right, Kevin Warsh joining us.
Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain podcast for full episodes right now.